We're from Global Minded, and for those of you who haven't joined us before, Global Minded is all about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, all manner of diversity, including the really crucial rural population. And that's the theme of this week's session. Some of you have been with us the last couple of days, so we're delighted to see you here again. For those of you just joining, if you want to put your name, affiliation, and your organization in the chat, it's really interesting to see the variety of people that are part of this, and that can be very helpful to the speakers that are addressing you as well. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the person who has really led our rural equity team. That's JC Whorton. He's one of our board members. And JC is a senior level energy and financial professional with over 40 years of extensive experience spanning all segments of the corporate value chain from both the physical and financial perspective. He grew up in a tiny town in Oklahoma. He might share a little bit more about that. So he's very familiar with rural issues. And he is currently a professor at the University of Colorado Leeth School of Business. And he's the author of many, many articles, including a book that just came out called The Flyover Nation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce JC Whorton and also to welcome all of you. So thank you for being here. JC?
Good afternoon. And to our audience, thank you for joining Global Minded today for our Rural Resilience session on economic development and related socioeconomic considerations in rural America. I'm very excited and honored today to have Arvin Trujillo, Kanon Worstell, and Marvin Leeth. Economic development is the lifeblood of every community. A community that ceases to grow will be one of the very first to go. And far too many rural communities are faced with that threat. The world is a very uncertain place, and it's more uncertain today than at any other time in our lifetimes, as we deal with unprecedented chaos and instability. COVID-19 is a massive turning point in history that is completely rebooting society, both rural and urban. Financially, it is clearly the most expensive catastrophe in history, and it is forever changing America that we were once so familiar with. As many as 4 million small businesses may be lost entirely in 2020. 1.5 million have already closed so far. Survivors are faced with decisions as to whether to adapt, pivot, or change the course altogether. According to the Center on Rural Innovation, rural communities are also more dependent than urban areas on certain industries that are some of the highest risk of demand disruption by COVID-19 or the technological inability to work remotely. Interestingly, this pandemic is relatively mild compared with the Great Plagues of past centuries, but it clearly demonstrates the complexity and vulnerabilities of global supply chains and critical infrastructure on modern commerce across most industries in every community. This stresses budgets and the ability for communities' ability to solve problems quickly and effectively to manage the existing crisis and create new opportunities for business growth. John Wesley Boyd Jr., the president and founder of the National Black Farmers Association, cannot be joining us today. His farm and ranch is located on the Virginia-North Carolina border and is experiencing heavy flooding due to Hurricane Isaiah. We all send our very best wishes to John, his family, his crops, and his livestock during this crisis. Kanon Worstell will begin the session today with a discussion on rural broadband and telecom infrastructure. cybersecurity challenges, and the role of local newspapers. Arvin Trujillo is the president of the Four Corners Economic Development and will present an economic overview of his Four Corners state area, followed by an economic overview of Southeastern Oklahoma by Marvin Leeth. Marvin's a lifelong friend of mine, a colleague, and longtime Oklahoma businessman and civic leader. It has been said that innovation and ingenuity shine brightest on the darkest days, and in every crisis there is opportunity. So welcome me in joining Karen, Arvin, and Marvin, and let's all explore the various ways to find opportunity in this crisis and to create a new rural resilience. Karen is the CEO of W Risk Group and founder of Mojo Maker for Women in Tech. Karen has over 30 years of information security experience, including tenure as the Chief Information Security Officer at Microsoft Corporation, AT&T Wireless, and Russell Investments. Karen, we're delighted to have you lead this conversation.
Well, unmute. Yes, it's a delight to be here and such an important topic. I'm glad we're having this conversation, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am going to admit that I grew up in rural America, but I spent the majority of my professional life in urban settings, or at least within commute distance to urban settings. And having been part of AT&T Wireless during the very beginning of, pardon me, of the cell phone revolution, being very keenly aware of the advantage of having access to internet everywhere and the ability to have access to broadband for a variety of functions. So I would like to just briefly kind of introduce some notes. I don't have all the answers. There's a lot of people working on this right now, but I think the thing that we can do today is introduce some of the topic to raise awareness to the problem. And I'm sure many of you who are on this call, this is not going to be new news to you. I had my big wake-up call to the impact of urban-centric big tech on rural communities when I was at Microsoft. I was sent in my very early days at Microsoft and this was in the early 2000s, to Australia. And I gave something like 5 talks in 3 or 4 days between Melbourne and Canberra and Sydney. And one of those conferences, one of those audiences were educators. And I sort of had my hat handed to me because their big complaint was we were absolutely unaware and unsensitive to the fact that in Australia, the internet is metered. And as you might be well aware, Microsoft tends to send out very large security updates every Tuesday, because it's called Patch Tuesday, and it's been going on forever. Those are very large downloads, and we were crushing the educational institutions with cost relating to broadband in order to be able to have access to the security updates that they needed for their educational institutions. So it was really I think a situation of total unawareness of what kinds of limitations there were to broadband. And as I was sharing with JC earlier, my husband and I both work out of a home office setting the majority of the time. And we are very bandwidth intensive with the work that we do. We take it for granted that we can have gigabit internet here in Denver. But just a few miles away in the foothills in the Front Range, people are unable to get reliable internet. So, and JC and I were commiserating about that earlier as well. So I think that we have to recognize that there is among the big tech, and when I say big tech, I'm talking about Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. It used to be LinkedIn, now LinkedIn is part of Microsoft. But those kinds of companies, I suspect have some awareness now of this problem, but it isn't solving the problem. And the reason I think this has got multiple issues that should be very concerning to all of us, from the standpoint that when we don't, well, let's see, if I could make a metaphor and a comparison, the inequity between the access to broadband in urban settings versus the rural settings, that inequity is a little like having a postal service, FedEx, and Amazon overnight delivery available in the city, but restricting the rural regions to having only the Pony Express. It's just a gigantic disparity in access to a whole variety of things that have now become the new normal for us in our society, in the US. And so we have, and some of the examples that are being talked about at the highest levels of government, and some funding is coming in the forms of grants in order to alleviate some of this. But right now, especially with COVID, the things that we have all experienced and have heard about almost every day on the news are things like telehealth, having access, having your doctor's appointments moved to broadband. I've had several, and I live in an urban setting. I've had several appointments that have had to been canceled for telehealth because of problems with internet. That's just magnified tremendously in rural settings, and this is affecting. It's not just an aspect of affect of access to health care, but there are individuals. I was for a time I served as a chaplain, a palliative care chaplain at the VA hospital in Portland, and one of the things that we did there was provide telehealth for segments of the population who are actually relatively traumatized and unable to have and unable to come and do in-person visits for their health care. And a lot of those individuals tend to choose to live in rural areas. And that was particularly true in Oregon. So we have the access to telehealth. How about education? Like, we're all wondering what's going to happen with education this fall. And we've had teachers who have been struggling with delivering services and delivering educational services to children who are at home. And we are seriously dealing with children who are disadvantaged by not having access to broadband necessary for completing schoolwork. So we have that, and then we have business operations, as we've had to we transitioned into a business environment where we can be socially distanced and we can still complete our business operations because we have a gigantic access to bandwidth. That is not something that is true everywhere. So there's a disadvantage that's being created by lack of access. All of these things are not really new news. They've just been really heightened, and we have a much stronger awareness of them now. I think there are programs that are coming from the current administration to address some of that inequity. It's probably well, I can't say for sure because I don't know everything that's going on, but it feels a little bit like too little, too late. But I will give them credit for at least making that move and making that effort so that we can get this out there and try to make some of these changes. Last thing I just want to mention is we are right now, COVID-19 is, I'm a cybersecurity person, so by training and most of my career. And the one thing that we've really noticed since COVID-19 is that we have so much of our critical infrastructure, so many of our businesses and so many of our homes and individuals who are now working on their own computers subject to cybercrime. A statistic that might surprise you is that if cybercrime were a nation state, it would be the 13th largest GDP in the world. COVID has made that even a bigger opportunity than we've ever had before. And when we don't have, so when we have limited access to bandwidth, but not sufficient access to bandwidth, one of the things that tends to suffer is security. So this is another area of concern. I think it's probably going to, security is always a little bit of a low level concern compared to some of the other things we should be dealing with. It just has to take its place in this, in the pecking order of priorities. But that's another thing we need to be aware of and add to our list of concerns for lack of broadband access. So those are some of my thoughts. I don't want to take up all the time today.
Well, thank you, Karen and Arvin. We now move to the Four Corners. So we're going to be in your neck of the woods here for a few minutes. Take it away. Arvin.
There, that must be better.
Yeah, there you go.
Again, thank you, JC. And I want to thank everybody who's joining this. I just want to give you a brief summary as to what is happening here in my neck of the woods. I work here in the Four Corners area out of Farmington, New Mexico. I'm a Navajo, and my career has been real varied as you lead into what I'm doing right now. Just to give you a taste, I'm a mining engineer by education, and my first part of my career worked out of Wyoming and here in the Four Corners area. Then from there, I was tapped by then President Kelsey Begay to join his administration with the Navajo Nation. So I headed up the Division of Natural Resources for the Navajo Nation, not only for President Begay, but then after his tenure, then President Joe Shirley asked me to stay on for 2 terms. So I was with the Navajo Nation for 12 years as the division director for the Division of Natural Resources. Then I was asked to, or not asked, I applied and was successful in joining Arizona Public Service Company with the Four Corners Power Plant, heading up their government relations group. So my career has gone in a number of different directions. And now I'm with the Four Corners Economic Development Organization here in Farmington. Now, in the Four Corners area here, in this particular area, we consist of communities within 4 states: Northwest New Mexico, Southwest Colorado, Northeast Arizona, and Southeast Utah. Also incorporated within this area, or included within this area, are 4 sovereign nations. We have the Navajo Nation, we have the Hickory Apache, we have the Southern Ute, and we have the Ute Mountain Ute. And so that's the diversity that we're working within here in this area. We have our two major cities in this area are Farmington, New Mexico, and Durango, Colorado. And so again, you look at the diversity that we're having to deal with in this region, looking both at tribal and non-tribal entities, looking at interstate relationships, and how do we bring those pieces together. Now, traditionally, our economic drivers in this region, we're a coal or we're a fossil fuel reliant area. Coal has been a major force in this area. We've got 2 power plants that are supplied by 2 mining operations. We have oil and gas in the area. And so those have been the major drivers since 1963. Because of that, we've had a lot of people come into the Farmington area to do their shopping. So there's a large retail footprint here. We have a number of mid-sized manufacturing and equipment processing companies in the region here that support the coal, the oil, and the natural gas industries. Agriculture is also a major area. We've got the Navajo Nation has their Nappy farm, which is a commercial operation, as well as being along the San Juan River. We have a number of farms along the river. And then, of course, in this region, we have three major medical centers. We have the San Juan Regional Medical Center out of Farmington. We have the Northern Navajo Medical Center out of Shiprock. And we have the Mercy Regional Medical Center out of Durango, Colorado. So those have been some of the major economic drivers that we've had or we have right now. What are the challenges? Well, of course, with the changes happening within the energy sector, right now the two coal plants have curtailed their operations. They've had different units retire. For instance, with San Juan Generating Station, that was a 4-unit operation, but 2 of those units, 2 and 3, retired in 2017. That's 924 megawatts that retired. 2 units are still running, units 1 and 4. Those are right now anticipated to retire in 2022, and that's another 924 megawatts. The Four Corners power plant, there you got units 1, 2, and 3 that have retired, and those retired in 2010. You've got the 2 larger units there, units 4 and 5, both at 770 megawatts, which are anticipated to retire in 2031. So you've got 1,540 megawatts coming out of Four Corners. Now, San Juan Generating Station is supplied by San Juan Mine, which is owned by Westmoreland Coal Company, and Navajo Mine supplies Four Corners Power Plant, and that's operated by the Navajo Transition, really by Bisti Fuels, which is an offshoot of Arch Minerals, but they are owned by the Navajo Nation, NTEC, the Navajo Transitional Energy Company. So that's where you see, with those 2 power plants, you're looking at revenues or salaries ranging about 85 to 90 million a year coming from the 2 operations separately. You've got the taxes, you've got the royalties for the tribes. So again, there's a lot hanging on those 2 plants and the mining operations. As far as the oil is concerned, because of the situations happening between the OPEC nations and Russia, of course, the oil demand, and with the pandemic, the oil demand has gone down tremendously. Oil and natural gas in this region has basically come to a standstill. Oil has been a producer here in this region since the 1930s. And so again, you're seeing 2 major economic drivers that have been here for decades and that have served this area for decades, suddenly going through transitions that we haven't seen before. And of course, with the pandemic, that's had serious implications on our retail businesses, on our service businesses. It's affected our tax structure, gross receipts taxes, etc. Because again, a lot of the surrounding Four Corners area comes to Farmington to do their shopping. So gross receipts taxes are greatly much affected by that. And so again, with that, you have those challenges that are happening to us economically. And you also have the challenges of the relationships, not only between the tribal and non-tribal entities, but also within the communities themselves. We're learning how to work with each other. It's a effort that's ongoing at this point in time. There have been certain times when there's been tremendous differences of opinion looking at land issues, water issues, community relations, not only race, but, looking at lending opportunities, looking at business relationships, how you work with the border towns versus the tribal entities. A lot of challenges in relationships there. And also in business development, looking at the competition between tribal and non-tribal entities, looking at where do you locate businesses? Do you locate them on the reservations or off the reservations? Who gets the advantage of those in that aspect? So you can see that the competition has been very, very focused and very has been a major part of the relationships here with these communities. So to have them come together and say, okay, let's trust each other, let's work together, is a new working experience, because everybody is looking at it more from a competitive aspect than from saying, how do we begin to work together to move through some of the challenges that we have today? So what's happening now? What are we doing about it? We can sit and complain, we can sit and just talk, but what are we actually doing about it right now? Well, one of the things that we're focused on right now is getting ownership into a plan as to how we can move forward. We've done that by developing a strategic plan. Four Corners Economic Development has brought communities together to try to work on a community strategic plan. We have one in place, looking at how we can diversify our economy. We're very much focused on energy, the extractive energy industry, but how do we begin to diversify our economy? And how do we do that in a partnership effort? How do we begin to work with each other to achieve this? And again, what we're looking at here is we're basically focusing on one, business retention and expansion, and infrastructure enhancement. Now, how do we begin to look at developing or focusing our efforts on the greater San Juan County community, but then expanding that to the Four Corners region, because we're all connected. And that's what you're going to see as I explain what we're trying to do. The first area is looking at transportation. You know, when I first came into this position, I was thinking more, let's focus on the businesses, the existing businesses. Let's look at retention. Let's look at expansion. But in order for us to really begin to take advantage of economic opportunities, we need the infrastructure. Now we've got highways. Recently, we're able to expand US 491 and US 550 in this region, both from 2-lane roads to 4-lane highways now. That's been completed. Right now, Farmington is finishing up work to get the enhancements completed with their airport, so that now we can again entertain commercial air transportation into this local airport here. So we're beginning to bring air transportation back in. The other area that we're working on is rail. We're wanting to bring rail into the San Juan County region. And this has been something that's been worked on for a number of years. And again, there's always been that differences of opinion between the Navajo Nation and the county as to how this would be set up. We've been able to resolve that by developing a memorandum of understanding between San Juan County and the Navajo Nation to work in partnership to bring rail to San Juan County and to work on economic and community development together as partners to help enhance the overall opportunities here in the Four Corners area. And so again, we have that MOU in place. It's been signed by both parties, and it came into effect as of February this year. Another area we're looking at is broadband enhancement. How do we begin to look at bringing, as Karen was talking about, broadband is important. How do we bring broadband into the regional area here? Right now, the outreach goes as far as cable television goes, and then it stops. And it's very frustrating where you're 2 houses down and you can't get internet. Why do I know that? I was one of those folks that lived 2 houses away from being able to get fast internet. And so I had to go to satellite, I had to go to HughesNet. And so again, that's what we see right now, and we're wanting to change that. We're looking at the chapters out there in the rural reservation on a western and a southern portions. They don't have internet access. And again, as the pandemic goes, we're looking at, as indicated, telemedicine, distance learning, all of these aspects, entrepreneurship. We're looking at all these opportunities that are not available to many of our citizens here in San Juan County because they don't have access to high-speed internet. We're working on that piece. We've got an engineering study for a fiber optic loop connecting 5 communities in Southwest Colorado and San Juan County. We've got the engineering study done there. We've initiated a team to start looking at middle mile planning for San Juan County. because the Navajo Nation is working on a middle mile plan for their nation, which again would include the western and southern portions of our county. Southwest Colorado is also working on a county-wide broadband plan for their region. And then also, we want to be able to combine that piece. We're also working on getting a San Juan County economic recovery team in place. As I indicated, we got 4 states that have all 4 different agendas as to how they're going to open, what they're going to do as far as economic development, how their businesses should be run. We're going to be looking at how we can bring that together and coordinate those efforts, including the Navajo Nation, because they're a part of this whole effort. And how do we help our businesses? And how do we better promote business retention and expansion? We're also looking at tourism and outdoor recreation. We're focusing on that aspect here in San Juan County. Southwest Colorado does a tremendous job in that. Southeast Utah does a tremendous job on that. We're just now beginning our efforts here in San Juan County, and we're working on that piece. So that's what we're doing right now here in this region. And looking at our lessons learned, what are we trying to, what are the real challenges, or what are we seeing improvements on, and what are we continuing to work on? One is to build ownership in this strategic effort. Get everybody together so we're all working in one direction and we're not working against each other. Let's not fight about who gets the biggest piece of the pie. Let's figure out how to make the pie bigger. Second is to promote participation, both by government and business entities in this effort. Invest themselves in it, not only monetarily, but their time and their resources into this. The biggest aspect to that, as I indicated, in the past, everything has been competitive, but we've got to build trust. We've got to build trust between our communities so that they're able to work with one another. So that's what's happening here in San Juan, in San Juan County region and the Four Corners region as a whole, as we're looking at things, JC, with Four Corners economic development.
Wow, thank you so much, Arvin. That is a phenomenal overview of your area. Really great. Marvin, can you tell us a little bit about Southeastern Oklahoma? And I want to see if I can recognize it's the place I grew up in after you describe it.
Okay, thank you, JC. I wanted to check to make sure I was unmuted there. Well, again, thank you for asking me to join you. And we're going to be talking about an area that if you took the main body of Oklahoma, not including the Panhandle, and divided it into thirds from north to south, we're going to be looking at the southern half of the eastern third. So we're really looking at probably about 10 to 12% of the total landmass of Oklahoma. But we have to realize too that this demographic area will fade in and out of the areas around it as well. We're going to be talking about the area that was always known as the Choctaw Nation. Again, it incorporates probably around 10 to 12% of Oklahoma in that southeastern corner. Now, one interesting fact of this area there are no cities in the entire region that has a population higher than 20,000. McAllister, which happens to be the county seat for Pittsburgh County, is probably the largest city in the area at around 18,000 or slightly above 18,000. And another interesting fact is it has remained between 15, 16, and 18,000 for the last 75 years. So we're looking at an area that, although some change has happened, we're looking at an area that's really been kind of economically frozen in time. To take a little closer look at the area, let's look at some of the economic drivers in our region there. And the biggest one is probably the McAllister Army Ammunition Depot. And this was opened up in about 1943, I believe. And it is now and has been since then by far the largest employer in the region. And it's actually one of the largest munition storage facilities in the United States, and at times houses or stores up to 1/3 of our total defense munitions for the nation. This facility, this plant, includes facilities for engineering and design for munitions, for manufacturing, for storage, but also for disposal of outdated munitions, both mechanical disassembly and at times open air detonation for old munitions. So we have quite an interesting economic driver there, but that can also be a detriment to the area as well. We actually have a lot of oil and gas exploration in the area and associated service companies. A lot of times we don't stop to realize just how much our oil and gas industries affect our economies in these areas. Not only the production of the oil and gas, but the service companies around that, the restaurants that have to feed the workers coming into the area. It has really a lot more impact than we notice at first glance. And then again, we have the small family-owned agricultural facilities, mostly in this part of the state. It's what we call the cow-calf cattle production facilities, where these families own anywhere from maybe 40 acres to a few hundred acres and produce cattle and sell those to the regional markets. And this has really been impacted off and on by the oil and gas industry. When we have an oil and gas boom in the state, then of course the royalty monies that flow into the area really bolster the family farms. And then when we see the oil and gas downturns, it negatively affects the family farms. We'll probably talk about that just a little bit more, of maybe how to smooth out that roller coaster ride a little bit. And more recently, the Native American gaming operations have really impacted not only Southeastern Oklahoma, but all of Oklahoma. The casinos are bringing in a lot of money from the states around them. And in this area that we're talking about, the casinos also draw money into the area from Texas and Arkansas, and probably some from Louisiana, but not as much as Texas and Arkansas brings in. So we have some positive assets there. But I want to look at, probably in any area we go into, the most important asset are the people, first and foremost. And development of our human resources has to be a priority. Through education, ongoing mentoring, there are so many different levels that we have to look at there. And that brings up the topic of education. We really need to stay on top of education, starting at pre-K all the way up through higher education, and maybe looking at kind of renovating our education process to zero in on the needs for the local children that are there. And this could be bringing back shop class into some of the schools where they used to have shop class. They don't today, to more technical type training. But it's, again, when we go back to looking at our human resources, it all has to start with the children and the next generation. Now, again, speaking of natural resources, especially natural gas, it's really abundant in the area, but it's also been a very volatile market. In Oklahoma, we always tend to kind of live high and spend wild when the times are good, and go into recession when the oil and gas industry withdraws. So we need to learn how to kind of smooth out that a little bit. And then recently the COVID related reduction of our demand for product has impacted us considerably. When people stopped traveling, stayed home, this was a sudden downturn in the, in the supply chain, and I think it impacted the entire region more than we really realized. Now, in Eastern Oklahoma, Oklahoma is known for its wind generation for alternative power, but that's mostly in Western Oklahoma. In Eastern Oklahoma, we're getting into the rolling hills and the areas that's almost mountainous in places. And so that disrupts the wind patterns and does not make wind power as prevalent as it is in the Western plains. Now, at one time, Eastern Oklahoma had quite a coal production industry, but that has really almost faded in later years and is not really an economic driver at all. Let's look at some of the challenges that I see anyway. And for the area, we have too much dependence on one single government employer. At any point in time, over 1,500 to 2,000 of the local population is employed at the Army Ammunition Depot. If this were to change, that would be an economic catastrophe for the area in many different ways. But then again, we talked about the weakness of the natural gas pricing due to excessive inventory. This is a volatile market and always has been. But one of the major problems that we're facing in that part of the country right now is illegal drug use, manufacture and distribution. This is something it's plaguing our youth. And if we get back to looking at having to develop our human resources, we have to find ways to control this epidemic as well as COVID-19. We have to deter our youth away from the drug problems that we have in that part of the country, especially with methamphetamine right now. I believe that that's really weakening the development of our younger generation there. Now back to a larger picture, we look at the global marketing such as Amazon.com, Walmart.com, et cetera, and that's weakening the small mom and pop retail operations. And again, this has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and causing many of the small businesses to close. They've always been kind of on shaky ground lately because of the big box stores. And now suddenly when they had to close for a period of time, they didn't have the resources to reopen when the state opened back up. So we're losing a lot of our mom and pop operations. And we're seeing a rapid evolution into a digitally connected America. And we've talked about that a lot. Karen has really given us an overview of that. And we've seen a rapid decline in the landline telephone system. Now, in the past, especially in the rural areas, you would pick up your phone book if you wanted to call a neighbor or call a business in town, flip through the phone book till you found their name, dial their number, and talk to them. That has changed. That is something that the cities have moved beyond, but again, parts of our nation are still trapped in that, but without the phone books. And so communication from person to person has been weakened there. We've seen a rapid decline in the local newspapers. Now, at one time, this was more of a social connection. The people took the newspapers to read what was going on in the towns and communities around them, but they also looked at the advertisements of the businesses, and the advertising supported the newspaper, and then the reading population supported the advertisers. But again, with everything going to Amazon.com and just a merchandising of convenience for the population, this has really changed for a large part of the population, but left some of the more vulnerable older people or some of the poorer people that do not have access to the internet that we've already talked about, leaving them without a source or a good source for their retail shopping. Those are really, the problems and the challenges that I see. But again, and I want to thank Arvin for saying one point a couple of times, and that is we've got to learn to work hand in hand and work together. We've got to go beyond competition and sometimes look at even standing hand in hand with our competitors when it's best for the overall good of the region around us, realizing that by bringing the region up, that it will bring up all of the businesses involved there. So I believe that really what it depends on is the resiliency of this rural population going back to the people. Now we face unprecedented times. We're facing times when everything's driven by technology, and then we're facing pandemics, COVID-19. Technology can be more controlled and managed, or more easily controlled and managed, but unexpected things like COVID-19 challenge the structure from top to bottom. It's something we haven't dealt with before, so we have to learn as we go along. And really, this really kind of pertains to how we address not only that problem, but the problems that we have in the rural areas that are lacking some of the facilities that we really need. Now, on Monday, I listened to a presentation that Chantal Unfug had given, and she really talked about identifying and quantifying the assets and resources that you have available, and then identifying the partners that you have to partner with and how to bring those partners to the table, and then identify specific goals and projects that would relate to these things, identify the obstacles and challenges involved, and then develop and implement specific, achievable, and measurable programs with diligent measurement and tracking, and then keep the team of partners involved and active. Consistently meet to analyze, revise, re-implement as necessary. And Arvin talked about the teams that are being put together in the Four Corners area, and I think that fits exactly what Chantal was talking about here. And I think that might be the key to any area moving forward, is just identifying these drivers and bringing them all together in a problem-solving agenda. And then really we have to learn not to be complacent during the good times. Now, I think that's especially true in Oklahoma. Again, as I've mentioned, we tend to ride the waves with our energy production and natural gas economy. We've got to learn to lower the curve there as well. Just as we did when we talked about COVID-19, we have to learn to not become complacent during the good times, but keep diligent, work together hand in hand during good times and bad times to achieve the goals, specific goals that we have set. And that's kind of an overlook of Southeastern Oklahoma. JC, does that resemble what you remember?
Exactly what I remembered. The one thing I would add very quickly before I want Arvin and Karen to comment, that particular military base is the backbone of that economy for that area. When Marvin and I were growing up and as young adults, from that area, we had a state senator that had been in office for over 50 years, the senior senator of Oklahoma. We had the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. We had the governor of the state of Oklahoma. We had the Chief Justice of the Court of Criminal, or the Court of Appeals for Oklahoma, and a 4-star general, all from that community where we grew up. They're all gone. And when you lose your political leadership and your community leadership on the chamber that ages, retires, and moves on, a lot of the infrastructure, like a military base that you have relied on for 70 years, is in jeopardy, which will just devastate a community when it is gone. So those are considerations that have to be built into every community. But Karen and Arvin, I'd love to have your comments as well on this.
Well, looking at what Marvin had to say, again, it really looks at how communities begin to come together. That is really I think that secret, that in terms of finding common ground amongst your different communities so that you can begin to work towards resolving some of the larger issues. For instance, here in Four Corners, we compete with the 4 major metropolitans in the 4-state region: Albuquerque, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Denver. And so the only way that we can really gain attention is if, as smaller communities, we combine our efforts and work towards common solutions that will bring opportunities here into the Four Corners area. Because again, looking at a small communities, let's say like Aztec, New Mexico, with 7,000-8,000 people, versus an Albuquerque or Rio Rancho, it's real difficult to see how they can compete with that. But if you can combine them with other smaller communities to make a larger community, for instance, the MSA for Farmington in this region is about 300,000 people. And that includes the 4-state region. So really looking at that piece and bringing folks together and having them recognize that, I think, is a big aspect of moving forward at this point in time, especially for rural communities.
Marvin, I totally agree with you. And I think the important thing is identifying the team that would really best come together for this. It needs to be political leaders, civic leaders, pastors, tribal leaders from the Native American tribes in the area. All of these have to come together as a team and work hand in hand to address specific issues. And to me, having a goal, achieving that goal, and then moving on to the next goal would be just very, very important.
I had one thought to add to Marvin's really wonderful overview, and that is, you said something that resonated with me about when the mom and pop shops all have to shut down, and I started to comment about it here in the chat. But when I was doing a study on behalf of Good Samaritan Hospital and the regional medical systems for Pierce County, Washington, I came to Denver from Pierce County. And while it might seem like a really urban corridor, Pierce County as a county, just south of Seattle, and all of the big tech in Seattle is considered a pretty rural community. It includes Mount Rainier, for example. It includes the Fort Lewis Army Base and all of the surrounding area. And one of the things that was super interesting about that was that when the United Way did its study there, they found that one of the major impacts with the economic health of the community and the individuals who live in these rural areas, there were so many things impacting them in terms of access to healthcare, access to education, access to childcare, and access to transportation. But the thing that was really hitting everybody very hard was when the mom and pop shops closed down, the jobs went in the toilet. And the ability for people to have their own livelihood in their local community is so important. And one of the things that got really highlighted by that was with all of the jobs in King County, just to the north, there's no transportation system in place that provides equitable access to transportation in a way where people who are living in the rural areas have any hope of being able to get to a job using public transportation. And so we've built in some real barriers into the system. They're structural barriers. And this is even when the rural community isn't like way out where there's no major cities, even when the rural communities are surrounded by development, that the importance of local economic health, the mom and pop shops, and keeping those things going as a way to keep the center of the economy going is, I think, really, it feels like it's being overlooked.
I totally agree. I think that's one of the things that we need to look at addressing. That could be one of the focus goals that each area that we're talking about would set up a program to look at, is how to protect, how to revive the mom and pop shops, and how to revive the social interaction that we've gotten so far away from with our text and cell phone usage. We're not adept at face-to-face communications anymore. We need to get back to that as a people, especially in the rural area where that was a big strength for them. They were socially isolated so much because of the population density that it was a big thing to get together and communicate with other people. And the mom and pop shops were not just a place to go by, they were also a social meeting point as well. So I think it's very important that, especially in the outlying areas, and we have to realize that these areas have different needs than our metropolitan high density population areas. It's a different population, different needs. And I think they need to address these on an individual regional basis.
Carol, we're getting short on time. Your comment, I am so indebted to Marvin, Arvin, and Karen. Incredible session. I've learned a lot.
It was fabulous. Thank you so much, JC and Marvin and Karen and Arvin and really, Marvin, I can't believe you jumped in without a day's notice when John had to cancel because you seem like you prepared for a few weeks. So thank you so much, all of you, for your insights. And I want to let you know about the remaining sessions this week. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning, Lisa recorded this session and it will be posted by tonight up on our YouTube channel, so you can share it with colleagues who maybe weren't able to be with us live. And then tomorrow afternoon at the same time, we have Ron Lazard, who's with the Department of Education, works with the White House, and the topic is fortifying Native students, faculty, and communities during and after COVID. And he has several, just like this, very esteemed panelists. And then on Friday, JC is going to be back to lead another session called Native American Business Opportunities, Tribal Economic Development, and Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Participation. and he has some incredible leaders there, one of whom is really heading up a big broadband initiative, but with some other people who I think represent, you know, the diversity of thought that really is part of Global Minded. So we're delighted to have you all. We hope you can join us for the remaining sessions this week. And if you can't time-wise, you know you can download them and they're free of charge on our YouTube channel. I also just want to mention that JC's book is called The Flyover Nation, Energy's Role in a Troubled Heartland. And that just came out a couple of months ago. And that's part of why he's dialed into so many different aspects of these issues as well. So please let us know other things, other topics, ways we can support your work and what you're doing. And we say that vaccine permitting, we all want to see you all live in June at Global Minded 2021. And this whole week was supposed to be JC's pre-conference. So he basically took the whole day and kind of repackaged it into these 5 different sessions this week. So thanks to all of you for being flexible, and really look forward to getting them vaccinated in the spring and being able to have some of that connection that Marvin was talking about, more of the face-to-face again, and to solving these big issues with you between now and then. So thanks to everybody, and on behalf of Lisa and myself and JC, we are delighted that you all could join us and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you,
Have a
everybody.
great rest of the day.